Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. This is a very somber atmosphere that we have here today. And I would like everyone, if you have a glass in the comments, please raise that glass. And we would like to remember fondly our friend, Epic Fantasy.
Hail the victorious dead.
Okay.
Epic Fantasy is dead. Long live Epic Fantasy.
So, yeah, Kev, thank you. I appreciate the condolences. So this is a very impromptu live stream. This is probably the most impromptu live stream I've ever done on my channel. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about it again, down in the comments below, first of all, there is a link to a live stream discussion that I had with the lovely Johanna Reeds a couple months ago.
That long ago, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy how much happens in a couple of months on YouTube. I think it feels like, I don't know. It was about 2 months ago. Mm-hmm. Don't make me go check. And we talked about epic fantasy and how it's fitting into mainstream market trends and how it seems like long form epic fantasy, has sometimes a hard time finding some footing with mainstream market trends and whatever. And it was a just kind of an open conversation about our thoughts and opinions on that. We tried to define epic fantasy, which we discovered is harder than it looks. And so now, as you know, we've gone from that to, is epic fantasy dead? No, epic fantasy's not dead. And it escalated very quickly into a conversation on, it got epic really fast. It does tend to do that. And I just wanted to jump on and have a kind of secondary conversation prompted by my friend and fellow epic fantasy, previous epic fantasy author, now that it's dead, Andrew D. Meredith, and just talk a little bit about our experiences with epic fantasy as authors and readers. And we don't really have an agenda for this. We have a few basic topics we want to cover, but I look forward to all of you guys' thoughts in the comments. So please feel free to join in the conversation. Andrew, before we get started, and I just realized I'm going to do this really quick. Tell everybody who you are and what you write so that they know who you are, because you've obviously never been on my channel before.
Not once. Never, not once. No. So I'm Andrew D. Meredith. I am a indie fantasy author. I have a long form epic fantasy series, The Glacian Saga, Deathless Beast, which is deathless. It's a deathless epic. Deathless Beast, Bone Shroud, and Gloves of Eons, and the fourth book, Dread Knight, will be coming out in this autumn. Then I have a smaller form fantasy, Slavic fantasy, which you could call epic because it's small scale, so it's not epic, I guess. Thrice and Fourscore are the first two books, and the third book will be coming out at the end of the year. And then I don't have it here because we're not talking about cozy today. I have a cozy fantasy called Quaint Creatures, Magical and Mundane, that just came out. It is epic fantasy in that it's almost RPG lit in its epic world, but it's all in a little city. So is it really epic? Who knows? Yeah.
I mean, you're just ahead of the curve, because now that you can't write epic fantasy anymore, you gotta find a new place.
I know.
Yeah. I'm behind. Yeah. I'm still working on an epic fantasy.
Yeah, you're just one book into it.
I know. Now I'm going to have to stop there. It's going to be the end of the trilogy.
There. Yep. It's not going to get finished now.
Yes, she did. If anybody hasn't seen Leslie the Nerdy Narrative's new,
I had chills.
It was awesome. She did a great review for Fourscore, so you guys should definitely check that out. Matt on books. I finally did a live stream that you can watch. Yay. Hello to all of my across the ponders and everywhere else in the world that usually can't attend my live streams. We're gonna touch on some differences in publishing trends, because obviously as indie authors, we have more of a read on the indie scene than we do on trad, but I know a lot of trad authors, so that helps kind of keep a pulse on what's going on. Anitha is here. Zin is here. Hello. Oh, is it almost your birthday, Zin? Happy birthday. Daniel's here. Britain's here. Don't worry, Daniel. Even if I can't call it epic fantasy, I will just market it as cozy fantasy, and people will be very surprised.
You know what? Let's talk about paper first and get that off the desk.
That's the hot button issue, really.
Yeah. So I did just watch a really good interview with my current obsession, Christopher Rocchio. And he was talking with another indie author and one who was trying to decide whether to go trad or indie. And they were both giving it was a very even-handed conversation. And Rocchio pointed out that he never denied, because he doesn't want to, bite the hand that feeds him, that he never denied or confirmed that they don't have paper. However, if publisher has a choice of printing a 300,000 word book or a 100,000 word book, they get to print 3 times as many of the 100,000 word books and get a better discount because it's by unit than they do on a 300,000 word book. And so they might have a book they really want to invest in and say, yeah, we love a Rocchio book. It'd be great to get another Sanderson book or whatever. I mean, even Rocchio special editions got pushed back because of Sanderson's printing of his specials. And that's to use the same printer. But if they're going to say, well, we need to make printing and make our money back, are they going to print 5,000 copies of a 300,000 word or 15,000 copies and make much more on their margins? They are going to lean towards 100,000. That does not mean they won't. They would just, to quote Bartleby the Scrivener, prefer not to. So
great character.
It is. The advantage that indie has over that is we don't print 5 to 10,000 copies of books at a time. We print 12 or 20, or if we have a Kickstarter, 25. But the point is we can keep printing. We get to keep printing, and they only print once, and then they spend a year trying to sell through all of their stuff. Yeah,
it's a very different marketing process.
Right. So I whether they are saying we don't want indie or not, and we can get in a whole conversation about agents and how I think a lot of what they say is to pre-vet before things ever even show up in their box because they're tired of something or they're bored or whatever. The advantage, they may say they don't want it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't occur, because it is. Always. There's never not been a single new epic fantasy author who is currently on the rise at all times. And, Sanderson was on the rise at a point, and now we've got others. Even you can say Christopher Rocchio was writing epic fantasy, but in space. So there's always a new epic fantasy author in trad. Red Rising, right? So there's always somebody. There's always somebody doing it. So it's not
doing epics.
Now, is there a room for more? That's where we probably get into the weeds,
right? So. And I mean, that goes into our whole discussion that you and I have had how many times about, the space that indie can offer to any genre that doesn't have as much in a traditional publishing realm, which is fine, that indie actually provides a fantastic backdrop to people writing right now long form epic fantasy content. Because one of the things, I argue this all the time, Anitha, I love you so much, but I would argue that it's sci fantasy, because it is, if you take just the storyline and take all the space out, it's literally an epic fantasy novel.
Dune.
In space.
Dune as well.
With technology. So yeah, like it is sci-fi, absolutely, but I think it's sci fantasy. It's kind of a blend. Exactly, Matt. That's what we're here to do. Zin, Anita, oh my gosh, I just talked to my close friend Anitha. Sorry, Anitha.
Well, according to Zen, today we're supposed to call her. What did he miscall her? He missed. Oh, he called her Smiths. So Anitha is Smiths today in the comments, guys.
Fabulous, love that. Yep. Okay, let's see. Hi, Cassidy. How's it going?
Evie just rolled in.
See? Daniel's got my back in the comments. Exactly. Also, Evie is I totally agree, Evie. Yep. I think it's interesting how people try to often separate the two so much. Like, no, they're not.
I do too.
They're sister genres. Like, let's be, the farmers and the cowboys should be friends, like, anybody get that reference?
It's all okay in sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah,
exactly.
Epic sci-fi, like there's so many different ways to categorize it, which is why subgenres are so anyways. we should. Well, I don't know if you would like it, Anita. Anyway, that's a different live stream. Hey, Casey, what's going on?
Even if she doesn't like it, she'll finish it. She never DNFs.
That's true. I'm here for the Anita being Smiths for the day. I'm here for that. So one of the things that I keep going back to is when I go into bookstores. And I'm talking about new bookstores. So I've been at how many Barnes and Noble? I've been at Barnes and Nobles now, Barnes and Noble all over my area of the US in the last few months. And I've been to a couple of other major new booksellers, and the long form epic fantasy series, some Barnes and Noble stores stock them better than others, which is always encouraging. But
which is probably part of the fact that they are more independently run now by management.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. But so many of them, if I go in, I can get maybe book 1 and book 5, maybe, of a lot of the series. Yeah. And before, like even a few years ago, I would go in and Sanderson had a huge section and a kiosk and a thing over here and the end cap and all this stuff. And then George R.R. Martin would have this whole big section and this whatever. And they've kind of even been shrunk down to like single shelves. I remember going into a Barnes and Noble local to me recently, and there were literally 5 George R.R. Martin books on a shelf. And that was it. And it was mind-blowing to me. And I recognize that like things change. But what's weird to me is that we're not seeing the long form epic fantasy novels taking center stage as much right now. And even for books like, the Red Rising series, which is really big right now, that doesn't have like a huge section. It's a full shelf, but it's not. So the point is, we talked about this a little bit before we went live. One of the things that I keep going back to is we talk about it all the time, how we all live in a bubble, right? We're in this fantasy bubble here on BookTube. And then we step outside of it and we remember that like normal people, A, don't read as much as we do, and B, don't read very differently than we do, which is fine. Everybody should read books. And I'm just happy that people are reading books. That's amazing. I love that. And I'm glad that there's so many options. We've never had more options for people who like very specific things, which is great. But the average person wandering into a Barnes and Noble who's like, I like a fantasy book, isn't going to have the same reading styles usually, and or like buying habits as somebody like you or I would. So catering to the very hyper-focused, obsessed fantasy nerd culture that we are in, which we love, is hard for large businesses to cater to because we're a smaller demographic than the mainstream general reader.
Right. And we also don't know why they stock certain things. Some things are pretty obvious, but then you could be looking through why is this book from 15 years ago still on the shelf? One, it may not have sold in all that time. And it could be because one of the people who work there likes the book and put it on there. And so it's easier for us to gripe and say, well, why don't they put more indie books on there? Well, there's reasons for that too. Why don't they put my favorite author on there? Well, there's reasons for that too. We don't know why any bookstore is going to stock one thing over another, and we can only speculate. And there's so much about the whole situation that is speculative, right? We speculate on why an agent will only take romantasy right now. That's not true. Because wait, they say they only take romantasy, but they back this author, and they're all epic fantasy, and this is dark. So got it. They are currently looking for a author type, not necessarily that they want romantasy, but they want the type of author who they are making assumptions on as well, who writes that kind of book so that they can go, oh, I like the cut of your jibe. Let's be friends and I'll be your agent and we'll make money together. So we can only speculate. Yeah. Like Pete said, it's all speculative for a reason. It's all speculation and assumptions and generalizations of people we don't know and understand. We can't know. We can only guess. But what we have to be cautious of is that we don't project fact on, well, that must mean. I heard an author say that there's no more paper, and it's like, okay, there's ebooks. I know, yeah, but you want your hard copies, but there's ebooks. They don't cost anything. And so what do you have? You have certain publishers who are primarily doing ebooks and very little printing, and good for them if they're going to push that, and they have a good direct to author or
it's giving opportunities to more authors. Right. That's great.
Yeah, Blackstone Audio I think does audiobooks only for certain books. They'll get a book and only do the audiobook. If it does really well, then it goes to print. Same with Tor.com I think is doing that. Where whatever they're called now, Torrent. Where they'll do an ebook to test out somebody, and if it does really well, then bam, 10,000 copies, and then they can make money. So,
well, and I think, having a discussion that centers around the idea, like, is epic fantasy dead? Which is a very, it's a very existential crisis kind of question to have. Right. It's a subgenre. It can't die. Like, it's not going anywhere. And I would just like to clarify briefly, because I forgot to at the beginning of this, because there's been a lot of things going around, and my name has gotten thrown around in conversation, and that's all fine. And I'm happy to be part of the conversation. But I would like to clarify that I have never once said that epic fantasy was dying. I just wanted to clear that up, other than in jest at the beginning of this live stream. And the thing, thanks. And I think coming in and looking at whatever, there's obviously different subgenres are going to kind of do that wheel of what's popular at the moment, and it reflects a lot of what's going on in society and a lot of other factors. But it's not, I don't know. I agree that the question of, is epic fantasy dying, is a little bit, like, you can't really have a conversation around that as easily as you can. Okay, let's look at what is epic fantasy doing in the traditional market, in the indie market? Like, how is it fitting in with the mainstream reading, population? Those kind of questions, I think, were what I was interested in exploring, especially in this conversation, because both of us are authors writing it. So do you feel threatened at all as an epic fantasy author? Are you afraid of your genre becoming obsolete?
No, because even if we took epic fantasy as a definitive, it must be Robert Jordan. Or on the flip side, it's such a wide scope. I mean, Asian inspired, Slavic inspired, late medieval as opposed to typical Wheel of Time era fantasy. It's already a giant wide scope, so you can't kill the wide scope. Even if you were to start with an argument of saying Wheel of Time type fantasies are dying, well, by the way, that's bull, because Cahill, Quaintrell, I mean, you can name a list of people who are currently haven't even finished their novels and keep writing more. So it's not like it's they're never going to finish. It's like they're writing a book every year or every other year, and they're all chonkers. So it's not like we're lacking for a epic fantasy can only be this type or abroad. So you can't kill it. And it's going to modify. It's going to change to the times. So if you're like, yeah, but I really want it to be the 80s style, it's like, you're right, that died. It died because it's not the 80s anymore. You can't. I mean, I'm sure we could have a 5-hour conversation with Dr. Chase about how you can't write the Wheel of Time again. You can't even try to emulate it, because it will have today's tropes and mindsets superimposed over it. Fact. Right. So.
Well, and I think, Cassidy, we had a comment in here somewhere. So I wanted to respond to this too, because one of the things that I think comes up with this discussion is, there's so many different subgenres within fantasy, and we talk about all that all the time. And how we often talk about how grimdark is more of a tone, not a subgenre, because you can have grimdark stories, like Cormac McCarthy is grimdark. Right. He's not fantasy, right?
Even if he wrote a post-apocalyptic story.
Right. So like, you have this broad range of different genres that can have a grimdark tone. And I think epic, honestly, fits in a similar kind of vein, because when we're talking about epic fantasy, what is epic fantasy doing in the publishing market? You know, any fantasy book can have an epic setting. Any type of fantasy book can have an epic setting. So I think what people are mostly, and I'm not going to speak for everyone, but from what it seems like, from my observations, it seems like when people are talking about this, we're kind of focusing in on the kind of long form, like heroic, you know, sword and sorcery style series. Because yeah, like sci-fi can have an epic setting, romantasy can have an epic setting, et cetera, et cetera. I think what people are looking at is how does like the kind of old school, like heroic sword and sorcery style fantasy fit into all of this.
And, you know, going back to trad versus indie, of whether we can even write a big fat book or not, and the cost of paper, is the way that long form fantasy works in trad dies on the vine over the course of a series. Every single book will sell less than the one before. It may cause you to sell more of the first book and cause a ripple effect, but the first book will always sell more. It always, and the last book, hopefully there's still readers around. If the book even gets greenlit, there's a lot of series that we don't even realize have died because they never got finished, right? Whereas we can do whatever we want in indie. If we want to write a 20-book series, we can. Now, we have a reader expectation that we're going to meet that promise, and we're still a young enough industry that not everybody has even had time to prove that they can do it.
Right.
But we can.
Well, if you think about how many indie authors are starting their career with their epic fantasy series right now, I mean, in 5 years, there's going to be a plethora of finished epic fantasy series in indie alone, which is very exciting. And I love that. And Evie, this is something, because obviously neither one of us are traditionally published. So I'm not going to talk a ton about, well, this is what's going on in the trad pub world, other than myself as a consumer at bookstores, because that's the experience that I've had. But this is where indie gets really exciting to me, because whatever's going on, or whatever is perceived to be going on in the wider market, like, that's the beauty of indie. It's like, yeah, come on in. Here's a chair. There's plenty of chairs. Write whatever you want. You don't have to fit into a trend. You don't have to fit into a box. You're not worried about, you know, is this something that an agent or a publishing house would want right now because they know they can market it? Yeah, like, you don't have to wonder if there's space for you.
There's always new authors, and there's always new readers, and the new authors are not stealing pie. I love this statement, Evie. I live by this, that we are not stealing pie, because readers, it takes us years to write a book. It takes a reader 2 weeks, tops. Maybe obviously longer for some like me, but most readers are going to finish it in 2 weeks, and that means they can read another book and then another book and another book. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to publish one book this year, and tops, I would probably publish 2 books a year for myself. I know some others are way faster than me. I'm not one of those machines that can. I'm very impressed by that. I'm not one of them. So 2 books versus I'm going to read between 80 and 100. So yeah, I mean, the beautiful part is that's such a lovely ratio to be in as an author. There's really, and I think also in indie and the community we have on BookTube and in the forums and Discords and wherever you have your book people, matching people to the books that will be a good fit for them is also something that this community excels at. And that's really cool, because it benefits both the readers and the authors, because the authors are more likely to find a reader who's like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I was looking for. And the authors are more likely to get positive reviews because they're being matched with people that want to read what they're writing. Right.
Absolutely. Cassidy's most recent one comment too. This is really important because, you know, that trad is a business.
Yes.
And they want money. And So yes, if they can find instant winner, they're constantly cashing on the instant winner, because if they can find one, that's gold. And then hopefully that cow continues to make milk, and so that they're going to milk it as long as they can. But that's why so many authors get their first book and then quit after that. And it can be because they don't have another book in them. That's fine. It could be that they get completely burned by the industry, because the industry says, you didn't sell it, so keep the money, but we're never going to pick you up again. And then they get, gray listed effectively, because they're not a good cash cow. And so, and that's incredibly sad. However, come to the indie side, we have cookies, because you get discouraged for a day because you get a bad review, and then tomorrow you keep writing, and we're all here to help you make more pie. We want more pie for everybody, because that's pie for us too. Yeah, because I like pie.
I can neither confirm nor deny this information, Evie. There are some books that have, I'm still reading a tiny little book that I started 2.5 years ago, and I've been reading it like a few pages at a time. So I get that. But most books, I would say, there's always going to be the book that slows you down, because there's, whether it's a chunk like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or it's just a little bit more dense in the prose or whatever. But yeah, typically there's more accessible fantasy specifically in that genre than fantasy that's going to really slow you down.
You think before BookTube and the modern internet, right? You had the 10 people you knew who actually read books. If you could convince them to come out of their house and tell you about books they've read, to give you recommendations. And now we do have this giant wealth of help, and certain people who are really, really, really good about matching books. So, it doesn't matter how many books he DNFs, Wizard can match you to a book that you will absolutely love. He's a great bookseller. And we have that ability to say, yes, there's 100 different entry points. 99 of them are not for you. But we can find you that one entry point that will be the floodgate.
Well, and that's something where a lot of the camaraderie that I've appreciated so much in our community amongst both the readers and the authors is that we're also not afraid to sell each other's books. Because if I have somebody that comes to me that is like, man, I'm really looking for something that's like got some, I ad nauseum have said this on my channel, but great, like really deep. I want deep world building. Like I know a guy, right? Like
guys probably.
I know. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But like, it's so easy to, when you're all like, there's not that isolation and that, okay, this author's making this much money and this author's, it's pretty, for the most part, there's obviously always outliers, but for the most part, it's very supportive, which is great.
And I would say to those authors that are watching right now, if you don't do that, that is something you should begin to practice immediately, because it not only it paints you really well. It's just good sportsmanship.
Yeah.
Because your book is not for everybody. We all know this, and if we don't know this, we're going to figure it out real fast.
I'm not supposed to tell them that, Andrew.
That's right.
It's a secret.
But if you are good at matching people to other people's books, then when you then say, it's like when we write and we say, if you don't know horses, don't write about horses. But if you know something really well, you can fake other things that you don't know well, and people will assume you know what you're talking about. It's the same with recommending books. If I can recommend Tori's books to the right person, enough people will realize that I'm an authority and will come to me for my book recs, and I can say, I got books too, and they're like, you know what? He knows how to match a book. Maybe I should read his books. It's like, and there you go. So be a decent person and be part of the community, and you're gonna win.
Yeah, that's why, like, when I have new authors that come to me for advice in getting into the community and what do I do first, I want you to put everything else down. Just start making some friends, like. And legitimate relationships with it. Like I want so badly to do an entire video about like beginning networking for indie authors, because like just some basic, like here's some basic, what's the word I'm looking for? Manners in the community,
Yes.
things to start with, ways to how to ask for a review and how
Call
not
it orientation.
To ask.
Call it
Yeah,
orientation because it's
exactly.
freshman orientation, right?
Yeah.
It's
And it's a lot. It's a huge learning curve. And even as somebody who I've been self-publishing since I was a kid, but coming into the online community, that was a completely new experience for me. And I was really lucky to have other authors that picked me up and were like, all right, here's the bathroom and here's the kitchen, you know? So yeah, I think that kind of camaraderie is also something that, I mean, also, sorry, I'm ADHDing all over the place. People who like us and everybody in the comments who just we're so passionate about the books that we read, and people are drawn to that. So no, epic fantasy is not going anywhere. It's going to be just fine because the people who love it, just like the other subgenres, love it so much that they're going to continue to get people to read it.
Yeah. To Evie's question. Have you seen like those skits of ADHD people who hyperfixate on a food? And they're like
mango licorice for me right now.
and every time you talk to them, like, oh yeah, I love my my chicken fried steak. They're like, well, you want to come over? We're gonna have burgers. No, I gotta go home. I have some chicken fried steak. And then like 6 months later, like, hey, you want to come over? We're gonna have chicken fried steak. Oh, no, don't talk. Oh, don't even say that word. No.
I'm over it now.
Fried steak, right?
Yeah.
And then a year later, you invite them out. Like, oh, sorry, I gotta go home. I have some chicken fried steak at home. And it's like, so I think it's like that, Evie. I think, there are lots of reasons to have burnout, right? Yeah, the chicken parm one. That's what it was.
Yeah.
There's lots of reasons to burn out. You're tired of series not being finished. You're tired of waiting for a series to be finished. You feel like maybe somebody who's written.
You're tired of chosen one tropes,
right? You're tired of somebody who's written 20 books in a single universe, writing another book in that universe, and you're just done. That's okay. That doesn't mean a year from now you're going to go back to chicken parm, right? Mm-hmm. You might go back to the chicken parm that you love, and it's okay to say, you know what, I'm really tired of chicken. I really could use a steak, or I just need a salad tonight. Mm-hmm. And again, we have this huge wealth of subgenres to pick from that you can be like, I need something new. I mean, I quit fantasy in 2010 and then found Mistborn, and that brought me back in because it was the new, and I could feel it, you know, culminating towards new fantasy and blah, blah, blah. But yeah. So, you know, burnout does not mean dead, to circle back to our initial question, but burnout is absolutely valid, and you shouldn't be force feeding yourself chicken parm. Just because that's what you have in the freezer.
Well, and here's the thing to that, Evie, too. If I'm looking at, again, if I'm separating our like super nerd culture of fantasy readers that we have here, and then the mainstream, you know, hey, I'm a reader and I feel like a fantasy book, which is the majority of the reading population. Yeah, I mean, fantasy standalones are going to appeal more to them because, you know, kind of coming in with some trepidation to the fantasy series aisle, and you have all of these giant books, and for the like, we always joke about oh yeah, normal people think 300 pages is a long book, right? For me, like 1,200 page books is a long book. My mom is constantly, when I bring over books to her house, she's like, that's a huge book.
Yeah, it's the weekend.
It's fine. I'll get it done by Sunday night. It's good. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, like I can understand as a general population reader who comes into fantasy and is like 14 800-page books, I'll go with the standalone, you know? So yeah, I think there's definitely a reason for a rise.
Like when I hear somebody who's never read fantasy and someone goes, "Oh, you should try Stormlight Archives," I want to slap them so hard. You're like, you want to start them on what?
Yeah, right.
They're like, are you trying to? I mean, you're right. It could be the right book. I get it. But you also are running a massive risk that you're just going to either run them away or they become. So, I mean, I as a bookseller, I try to think for the next generation too. Mm-hmm. Not only do I not want to lose a potential reader, I don't want them to tell their children that fantasy sucks because they tried one once called Mistborn or whatever it was, Stormlight. And that's what I was saying, it was Stormlight. And they're like, you should never touch those things. They're just too much. That's all fantasy is, right? And it's like, no. But whose fault was that? Was it somebody who got a little too excited and said, you should read this big epic fantasy? You know, I'm thinking about reading epic fantasy, but I've only ever read a Western. Well, then maybe you should start them off with Lonesome Dove. Don't jump them into fantasy. Let's baby step them in.
Or give them a short fantasy Western book to try.
Right. If only I knew somebody who's writing one.
And to further comment on this, Evie, I actually think that the rise of fantasy standalones is a really good sign, because it shows that people are interested in the genre, and a lot of people are looking for standalones. As they gain confidence with standalones and shorter fantasy books, I would say those people are more likely now to say, you know, I've had some really cool experiences with these standalones. That's been great. And I've kind of figured out what I like to read now. I think I'm going to try this series and see what happens.
I've been really enjoying seeing indie doing more of that too. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a proof of industry maturity.
Yeah.
Not you know, and it's speaking generally, but that I know that Trad will say, you need to only send me your standalones. And a lot of us who are in indie were like, you can't tell me what to do. I don't want to write a standalone.
Don't tell me what to do.
I'm going to write my big epic fantasy. But then some of us are like, you know what? I kind of want to write a standalone. Now it's on my terms. And so that's a sign of maturity, of realizing not, you know, I don't have to admit that Trav was right and I should have written a standalone. I'm not going to do that. But I can't say, you know what? I am kind of interested in challenging myself for writing a standalone so that it, so that I can say I've done it, for one, and because it might be a really good reader magnet.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think, you know, it's a lot of indie authors are doing this, and I think you and I are kind of on the same path too, where we're giving our readers multiple entry points, right? If somebody comes to you and is like, I'm not ready for like a super deep dive epic fantasy series, you're like, that's okay. Needle and Leaf.
Yeah.
Short, easy, you know, smaller cast, action adventure kind of vibes. You know, I've got Phased and Bloodstones. I have a fantasy Western I'm working on right now. And that's intentional, because I want to give my readers different options for, I want to read your book, but maybe Bloodstones is a little too much for me right now. Okay, cool. Here's 2 other options. I want to definitely jump back into the comments quickly, because there's been some good ones.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe. Everyone should read Wistful Ascending, by the way. It's incredible. Eggplant parm sounds really good. Brian says, I knew.
I feel so hard for you right now.
I knew this was coming, Brian. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, but it's also kind of on you, because you did keep going.
It's all your fault, Brian.
It's all your fault.
Shogun to Janny to Malazan to Sun Eater to I love all of those things. I don't know David Mitchell, because I haven't read him yet, but like, other than that, I love all of these things, and that doesn't even sound fun to me at all.
I will say, because I know Brian's old enough to appreciate the reference, but it feels like you're the man who goes into the restaurant in The Meaning of Life, and he'll know that skit from Meaning of Life and the one little mint. And I'm wondering what your one little mint is going to be this weekend.
The one for the road.
Yes.
I just finished reading that this last couple weeks. Hey, Shad. The real personalities come out on live streams. That's the truth.
It's a metaphorical slap. Worst case scenario, I write you into a book.
Eviscerate
That's
you. That's
never a good thing. Eviscerate you in fiction.
Yep.
And you'll never know.
You'll never know.
But everybody else will.
Yes. It's going to be great. Started Fantasy, The Song of Ice and Fire. I do feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, so feel free to contradict me in the chat, guys, but it seems like a lot of people's start in fantasy now for new readers is drastically different than it was then, like, generally speaking, than it was when we were younger. So, like,
I mean, I will point out that when we were younger, Song of Ice and Fire had not been written.
No, but I mean the longer, like the Wheel of Times, and I started reading Tolkien, and I started reading, even Harry Potter was like a longer series, you know, at the time. And I feel like maybe now people are more interested in, let me try something first. I don't know. Yeah, exactly, Pete. Hi, Safina. Love reading fantasy books at the moment into historical fiction. That is another genre very near and dear to my heart, and also a sister genre to fantasy, in my opinion. I don't know if I'd recommend Dark Tower as a first read. I haven't read it yet, but based on what I know, I am going to read my first Stephen King this year, though. Andrew Watson's in the chat, another author. Go check out Harbinger of Justice. Some series can change what subgenres they fall into with new books as the story evolves too. This is when recs from people are so helpful. Absolutely. That's one of the things we've joked about before is in the indie community is you put your book out there and then your readers tell you what subgenre it's in. And that's very helpful. I don't like standalones. I'm less likely to read. That's fair. That's fair. Kit says, need to define the terms. What does dead mean? Obviously, there can be. We kind of talked about that in the beginning of the video, too, where, yeah, obviously it's not dead. And shelf space doesn't equate whether or not epic fantasy is going to disappear off the planet. It's not. Shocking news. Breaking news. But, yeah, I agree.
There's always going to be shifts in what a bookstore will carry, and they'll be back as soon as Hollywood picks up another fantasy to make the big blockbuster on. It's going to be back in, and then suddenly everybody's going to want more of it. And so then they're going to start marketing and saying that everything's just like Hunger Games, and Tori's going to say, no, it's not.
No, it's not. Anyways, I'm zipping before I start that soapbox again. No, I will. I'm just holding you in suspense as long as possible. I don't think it's in a rut either, Britton, to be honest. I think that epic fantasy with the options that authors have now with indie and small press is the freest it's ever been. We can literally write whatever we want in epic fantasy. If you look back at, older fantasy series, like really older fantasy series, if you're going back like pre, 1990s. And I realize somebody in the comments is going to be like, that's not that old. You know what I'm talking about. The older
is considered historical fiction
now. Yeah, exactly. So going back prior to that with the 70s, 80s, etc. I feel like there was more of a rut there than there is now by far. And I would presume that because of talking to authors who were there writing books during that season.
Now I'll push back a little bit on this and say that I think the rut is similar to what we see now, only now it's algorithm driven. So like when you talk with people like Janie Wirtz, like there were lots of people just not being read.
Yeah.
Right. So they existed, but weren't being read because the only things the bookstores were promoting were the big five.
Right.
Right. And so today, like I and it's not anybody's fault except the algorithm in a lot of senses that Britton, you maybe aren't seeing fantasy. It's not showing up when you go searching. Well, that's because it's being buried by design. Because the desire is that you only see the rut.
But I think it also has, because I mean, I'm looking at Janie is a great example of this, I think, where social media has also contributed to lifting her books up in a lot of ways. And that's been really exciting to see. And I mean, I've been reading, it was an absolute delight. I got to have Juliette Marillier on my channel, who is a wonderful lady. You guys should go check out my interview with her because she just had some incredible wisdom and just beautiful philosophies on writing. And I think that's also the beauty of the space we have created, because we're forcing the algorithm to see more of it, whether it wants to or not. Hey, Matt, welcome back. I think we're doing a decent job. I don't know if the chat would agree, but
yeah,
Brian,
we have to wait 3 days.
Yeah, to see if it worked or not. Okay, I'm gonna catch up on some comments because y'all have so much.
Yeah, they didn't like my 90s comment. So while she's looking, so I mean, I think I was born in the 80s, and to me, the 70s and 60s were old, and that was 20 years prior. So 20 years was 2004.
You'll never know, Pete. Okay, let's see. Oh, Mitchell. Yeah. David Mitchell would be a tough sell for me, I think. It's true. Honestly, most of us can, though, which is the cool part.
It's true.
Yeah, I did see that Sutherland passed away. That was really sad. It's not old. It's just considered historical now, which is weird as a 90s kid, early 90s kid. I was a 91. Older than Shrek is old to some people, which is sad. Yeah. Well. Nice, Anitha. People also tend to think about what's coming out this week or this month and compare it to the entire output of, say, the 90s. If you're
right.
Epic fan. Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Joe. Better than when I was a kid and everything had to be like Tolkien. I think that's what I mean, John, is that we're, I think, breaking out of or maybe we're not in that rut anymore because there's so many different options in terms of the spectrum of epic fantasy now. And nobody, there's always going to be people that are like trying to write the next whatever. But most of us, I would say, especially from what I've seen in the indie sphere, we're kind of making our own rule book as we go. Brian and epic fantasy. We'll have to do another toast. I know there's been a ton of videos recently. I have tried to watch as many of them as I can. But yeah, I know there's been a lot recently. Hold on. Hey, Ryan, how's it going? Laura's here. Hi, Laura. Okay.
So let me bring this back to encouragement. If you are writing an epic fantasy and you are feeling now discouraged, maybe you should stop. I would take that thought out back and put it down, because you should still write it, because it doesn't matter if one here comes mean Andrew again. If some moron tells you that your book, well, it just sounds like Wheel of Time, I think you're just ripping it off. Don't listen to that moron. Only you can tell the story the way you're going to tell it. If you are that worried about it being a ripoff of something else, chances are it's not going to be, because you're worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you also say, no, my goal is to write an absolute, I'm writing the next Wheel of Time and it's going to be just like Wheel of Time. Fine. Then that person's what that person said should encourage you. But the point is that fantasy ain't dead.
Mm-hmm.
And you should continue to work on the thing that you're writing. Will there be changes made to it? Yes. Are you plugged into the community that will help you make changes to it, that will improve it, and maybe say, like, if I had people helping me with Thrice, that as I was writing it, Witcher was coming out on TV, and as I was publishing it, Mandalorian was coming out, and I'm like, man, a lot of these things are a lot like Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. So I had to by hand make changes so that it wasn't just a ripoff of Mandalorian, having already written it. But when you're in a community, you can have readers who will look at your book and say, this one thing is a lot like X. And you might say, yep, that was the plan. Or, oh, I did not know, because not all of us can read every book in the world. I mean, Andrew's trying to DNF through all of them. And
not even here to defend himself.
We'll see.
Maybe he might.
Maybe. Who knows? But that's the advantage of community, is that you have friends and people who would like to read things like you, who have read other things you have not written, and can help you make sure that you aren't putting up a corpse, if that's what you're worried about. And if you're writing necromancy, then you should be putting up corpses.
Working on it. Yep, Spicy Andrew's out. I don't know. That's good advice, though, because I feel like, back when I was first starting in self-publishing, when I was a teenager, I was around a lot, because at the time, like, the social media boom of self-publishing didn't exist at that point. Yeah. And so it was all in person, word of mouth, going to conventions, teaching at, libraries and whatever else. And being around a lot of the traditional publishers who were also in that sphere with me, teaching, whatever, presenting, there was a lot of people were disheartened then too about, well, yeah, like my book's not doing really well because it's not this trend or that. I mean, there were trends back then and I wasn't paying attention to them as much as I do now because I was 14. I was like, I'm gonna write whatever I want. I don't know that much has changed actually now that I think about it, but I'm more aware of the trends now than I was then.
Yeah.
And so, and as a kid, I was just there because I was really passionate about telling stories. And I remember now looking back at it, so many of the authors I met seemed so disheartened because they'd been in it for so long and they were trying to hustle with the trends and find readers, and it was hard and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's really important in all of these discussions as an author, only step in as much as you are comfortable with, because the most important thing you can do is disengage for a while from the conversations and go write your book.
Yep.
And be passionate about it and constantly go back to the why. If you're having a really tough day, go back and just ask yourself, like, why did I fall in love with these characters in the first place? Yep. Why am I writing this book? Because it's always going to, or it always theoretically is going to recenter you and bring you back to, okay, but my story doesn't have to be these things. It's just my story. And that passion is so much of what is going to connect you with the readers that will love your book.
And go back to your inspirations too. Mm-hmm. If you need a break, don't read the new book. Go read an old book that you love. Go watch Lord of the Rings. We just did a rewatch of Lord of the Rings and I haven't cried as much through a watch of Lord of the Rings than I did this last time, and ended last night thinking, man, I can't wait to write the next Collation book.
Right.
Man, I hope I can do something as even remotely as good as this. Yeah. And so that if that's something that draws you, your inspiration, go watch the old movies. That's okay to go watch the movie you watched 100 times because it's the one movie that makes you go, oh, I wish I could write something like this, because you are writing something like this. Go get inspired. Go pet a cat.
Yeah.
Jinx.
Yeah, I've been doing that a lot. And this is, not exactly on topic with what we were talking about, but since we're here. The other thing that I think doesn't get celebrated or enough attention, Novi is now rubbing on my computer and she's trying to knock it off of the TV tray, is the time that we spend creating quietly. Right? When we talk about writing, people, that to them invokes you're at your computer, you're typing, you're getting in word count, and that's writing. So much of writing is like going outside and touching grass.
Exactly.
Watching your favorite films, reading your favorite books, talking to your favorite people, disengaging from the writing, the word count process for a while. And that's so underappreciated, I think, in what often becomes kind of a hustle culture.
If you take an afternoon and you go buy a journal that you're not going to write in, go buy a Lamy. So a really nice one. It's got to be a really nice leather journal. You buy yourself a Lamy pen for $40 with some extra with ink cartridges, put it in a backpack with water in it, and go for a hike, knowing that you're planning at some point to sit down for an hour and write. Then when you get to that point, sit down and don't write for an hour and just stare at nature and go, wow, I feel so good after this because I didn't write anything. And then go home and you will probably write a ton.
And then you don't even have to write in your journal. Just leave it out and tell people that that's your super secret, like planning journal for your books.
And eventually you can go with the other 10 you've already bought that all have one page written in. And that's a good thing.
You know, what's really hilarious about that is I 100% have several very nice journals sitting in the bottom drawer of my nightstand right now that are beautiful, but I've never used them.
Yeah. I've got this one.
Oh,
that one's got like, I tend to rip out pages once they get too messy, but yeah, that's got a little bit.
See, that's the thing is I buy the really, really nice one because I'm like, this is going to inspire me to write a book. I keep
buying this one, but you can't actually write in it because it's got too much. It's fiber.
It's hard to like.
But they're so pretty though because it's all pressed. paper. I've got like 3 of those.
The one I actually end up writing in is the like dollar store plastic boards, like llamas.
Yeah. I finally started writing in, if I have a moleskin, I'll write in them. But when I was a kid, they were too expensive. And it was like, I would never even buy one in the first place. And then I started buying them. And then it was like, I can write in a moleskin and they're easy to fill. And, but if you buy a nice leather one, everybody needs one unwritten in leather journal.
That's part of the, that's part of the new authors startup pack.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. That's one of the items you get in the tutorial.
Yes. Go buy make your parents buy you a $40 leather journal and a $40 Lammy.
And then pen. You'll be an author.
Yeah, be an author. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fact.
Yes. No, I am writing a necromancer main character, but necromancy is not a thing yet, and I'm enjoying the space of time. You know what? I lied. It is probably a thing. I just don't read enough romantasy to know that it's a thing yet. Romantasy peeps in the chat I'm assuming that's a thing. I'm assuming. I don't know. That says hi. I have a problem with buying nice notebooks and journals that I know it's the same problem with book collecting. Like whenever I get a super special edition of a book, I don't want to actually read it because I'm afraid I'm going to wreck it.
Evie doesn't know what a Lammy is.
I am too. I'm a spiral notebook person too, Jim, because like, I don't know. When I have to hold it open to write in it, still going through the 27 million free journals I got in college with random company names on them. Nice, Pete. Do the random NPC in the park right in your blank journal. Ooh.
This is a Lammy.
That is a nice pen.
You can get them for like 20, 25, maybe 30. And they're replaceable cartridges. You'll only get like 3 pages in a journal before you run out of the ink on a cartridge, but they're replaceable cartridges, and you can get 100. You get like 3 or 4 different colors. If you want pink, purple, green, you got it. And then you replace it. They do have ones where you can actually, it has like a suction refill where you put it down into an inkwell and so you can refill it. But you can buy them for they're really not expensive, and they're a really nice quill pen, really nice fountain pen. But Lamy, Lammy.
Let's see. It's possible. Photographs of handwritten first drafts make good reader magnets. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you handwrite your first drafts, they come out really messy on the page because you have so much crossed out, but they tend to be incredibly clean when you transpose them because you've spent more time thinking. And so each sentence, and so I know a lot of people who their flow state just lasts for hours because they're slowly writing it, and so their brain is constantly fixing it as they go, and so you end up with a really clean long
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would struggle to have the patience to handwrite my entire book. It would drive me nuts. But I do know a lot of people who handwrite, and I think I have heard nothing but positive that it's really helped. Touche, Brian. Necromancy. There you go.
That's true.
That's true. So anybody have any further comments in the chat? Otherwise, we'll kind of close up here. I just wanted to come on briefly and chat. It was really just an excuse to come on and talk to you guys again. And we just happened to have a topic. So thank you guys for being in the chat and adding your thoughts, because I appreciate that. And yeah, epic fantasy is not going anywhere. It's not dead. We all knew this, but it's important to reiterate because I think I do agree, Andrew, that, you know, in giving that advice to newer authors, if you see things like that going around the social media spheres, it can be disheartening to, you know, I tend to ignore more than I should, but like for people that are really tapped into what's going on and they're trying to figure out where their space is and writing their book. Yeah. I mean, if somebody's writing an epic fantasy series that could be the next amazing thing that we're all going to love reading, and they're like, oh, is epic fantasy, maybe I should write something else. Maybe nobody's going to want to read that, So to anybody who's writing epic fantasy,
don't
go
trunk it.
you. Yeah, go you. My husband still handwrites a lot of stuff. My takeaway is if you see epic fantasy, say epic fantasy. There you go.
Twitter for the next few days is going to be everybody from the chat here just typing epic fantasy and comments on every book that is seen as an epic fantasy.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a cool thing to do, you guys. If you're on Twitter or in the Discords anywhere, feel free to like randomly shout out your favorite epic fantasy series and just, give them a little bit of love, because that never hurts. And the authors will be, if they are around to see it, they'll be thrilled.
Positivity train.
Yeah. Celebrate the wonderful community and readers we have instead of lamenting the thing that we don't. Exactly. Because we have so many awesome authors and readers and books and series. And there's amazing new books being written every day. Yep. And that's so cool. It's so cool to be a part of all of that. And we are, we have the added blessing of being nerds. So we get to see it on a much closer scale than a lot of people do, which is very cool. Kale says, remember, just keep turning the page. Exactly. Yeah, so go epic fantasy out in the social media verse. Show some love to your favorite series.
Yes.
And tell people to read them. And Pete, go make your Jeopardy commercials. So... All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching the replay, thank you for joining us. Down in the description box below, you will find a link to Andrew's website and my website if you're interested in checking out our epic fantasy books. And there is also a link down in the description box below to the much longer discussion that I had 2 months ago with Johanna about epic fantasy that kind of started my part in this conversation. So yeah, basically check for the links, and y'all have a good day and enjoy your reads. We'll see you guys later.
See you later.